Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the NCDIT BEAD and Digital Equity Planning Quarterly Update for Q2. I hope you all are in the right place. We are going to go ahead and get started, but first I have a couple of housekeeping items. We are going to run through our slides and then entertain all of your questions that you can submit through the chat feature. Or if you would like to turn on your camera and unmute yourself, we want to make this as interactive as possible. After we're done with our slides, please feel free to do so and we will answer your questions. But now I'm going to turn it over to Emily Ganji, who is going to get us kicked off.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today and sharing your time with us and for your interest in our BEAD and digital equity planning for the state of North Carolina. I'm Emily Ganji and I'm the Policy Director for the Division of Broadband and Digital Equity. And Crystal, if you'll go to the next slide. Thank you. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Angie Bailey, who's the Director of the Broadband Infrastructure Office, Annette Taylor, who's the Director of our Office of Digital Equity and Literacy, and Maggie Woods, who's a Digital Equity Manager in the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy. We're excited to be with you today and share updates on the work that we've done in the last 3 months since we were last together on one of these webinars. Crystal, if you'll go to the next slide. Here's a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. We've got some data to share with you, some mapping and some indicators. We're also going to update you on where we are in the planning process and share with you some of the initial themes that we've heard from the regional sessions that we did around the state and a virtual session that we hosted online this week, and where we're going with all that feedback next. And then we've also got some survey updates that we want to share with you, and we want to ask for your help getting folks engaged in taking those surveys and providing more data that we can use in our planning. As I suspect you all know, our best estimates are that more than 1 million North Carolina households are on the wrong side of the digital divide. And you hear us say that a lot, but it's what gets us all up every morning and keeps us doing this work. And that means that there are 1 million households in our state who either don't have adequate internet access, or they can't afford the service that is available to them, or they don't have the devices and digital skills that they need to participate fully in our digital society and economy. And we're all doing our best in partnership with you and your organizations and your communities to try to overcome that divide and to help folks get the access and affordability and devices and skills that they need to thrive in North Carolina. Next slide, please, Crystal. I goofed and went to the next slide too fast. Sorry, Angie, I stole your thunder. I did want to say that the purpose of our webinar today is that we're going to provide an update on our planning efforts to date and the resources that have become available since we were last together. Some of this information you may have seen in other events that we've hosted or in our regional convenings, but we wanted to make sure that all stakeholders have access to it because this webinar will be recorded and posted on our website. So just know that we're erring on the side of oversharing to make sure everybody has the information, because it's important to us that we be as transparent in this process as we can be. And for those of you who joined us a little later, please do post questions that you have during the course of our presentation in the chat, and we've got time reserved after our presentation to answer those. So please feel free to pop them in the chat whenever they come to mind, and Crystal's going to help us moderate and answer those when we get to that Q&A time. So now I'm going to turn it over to Angie Bailey, who's going to share some exciting data with you.
Thank you, Emily. And thanks to everybody for being with us today. We know y'all may have participated in some of the listening sessions for the BEAD and digital equity work. But as Emily said, we want to overshare and make sure everyone is kind of up to speed, because there's a lot of pieces to all this. So as far as the mapping work goes, as this slide is called, it's an evolving identification of unserved and underserved locations. So really, we've got about $1 billion in infrastructure funds under our American Rescue Plan Act funding. We've got probably another $1 billion coming in our BEAD allocation. And so the foundation of that is we really have to be sure that we know where every unserved and underserved location is in the state. We're working hard on that. So I wanted to just kind of remind everyone and share what's happened with the change in the FCC's process. So they collect data from broadband service providers every 6 months. This slide that you see here is the Form 477 data. So the FCC has been using that process since about 2015. That's census block level granularity. So if a provider says they serve one household in the block, the whole household is shown as being served. And so this was the former process. What we had for North Carolina is roughly 70,000-ish unserved households was our estimate based on those unserved census blocks. Unserved means service available of 25.3 or less than 25.3, sorry. Underserved blocks, we had an estimate of about 125,000. And so this is what we've known based on the FCC's Form 77 process. Next slide, please. And so late last year, the FCC launched its new program that they've been working on for years, which is called the broadband data collection process. And so it's a whole different level of granularity where they're collecting data from broadband service providers at the location level. And so it's a big change for the country. It's a big change for the FCC, big change for the providers, big change for the states. But what we've found out in the initial iteration of that data is that according to the FCC data, we have about 253,000 unserved locations in the state, about 267,000 underserved locations. And again, this was the first data set that came out. I believe it came out in December. With data as of June 2022. There is a new set that just came out last week. And so we have not yet published those numbers on these slides. But again, the important thing to focus on is the level of granularity that we now have and all this red that we see in the state. And we want to make sure that these are the locations that get service available through this infrastructure funding. Next slide, please. And so because it's hard to look at every location in the state in one map, we have an amazing mapping team within our division. We have our own staff folks, and then we
It appears Angie is frozen. Emily, could you take over for a moment?
Sure. I was waiting to see if it was just me, but she froze for. So thank you for letting me know it wasn't. Oh, looks like Angie's back.
My whole computer just shut down all of a sudden. I'm so sorry. That was so strange.
So I've told, as we've traveled around the state, I've told everybody that since I came to work for DIT, I've had more technology woes. It's just a given that wherever we go, some sort of technology will fail us. It just
totally went blue. Anyway, it's coming back, but I'll just use my phone. So I'm sorry, I apologize for that. And now I'll have to look more closely at my phone. But so essentially, it's hard to look at every location in the state. So our partners at the Center for Geographic Information and Analysis at DIT, who's our mapping partners, they've developed this HEXBIN process so that we can kind of better analyze where our areas of need are. And so basically the darker pink you get is the number of unserved locations, and the darker blue you get is the percent of unserved. And so depending on what you want to focus on, numbers or percents, the darker the purple is both of those factors. So this is kind of one way that we're looking to analyze areas in the state. Next slide, please. And so this is an example of a county profile, and we do have these county broadband profiles on our website. Well, actually at nc1map.gov, you can see the link there on the slide. But so we have a view of each county with these with the HEXBINs of unserved areas. The cross-hatching is where there's already federal grant awards of some type. So it could be Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, could be Reconnect from USDA. But so those areas are considered protected. And so just calling out those areas. We also have our Great Grant Awards from NCDIT. And we have in red, our triangles are our NC Broadband Survey results. So it's a good way to start understanding what's happening with the county. So we encourage everyone to please look at those And we will be updating those with the newest FCC data from last week. Next slide, please. And so speaking of the red triangles that show the NC Broadband survey results, we've had our survey out for a couple years. It basically, we're asking households or businesses to participate, take a speed test so we can find out the actual speeds you're getting at your location. If you don't have any service, you can either call in to the number on the slide or text, and we can register that it is an unserved location. We do need you to include your address, where you're reporting the unserved, underserved area. And kind of the new news on the NC Broadband survey is that we have added a few fields to it, contact information fields that we needed so that we can actually submit this data as part of our FCC challenge process. So we encourage you to please use that. Again, we use the data and then we share it with the FCC. I think I didn't speak to challenges, but just quickly, the FCC publishes their data every 6 months, and they do take challenges on their website for availability, if we believe the availability status is incorrect, and also if we believe the location is incorrect, as far as where the location actually sits in a geospatial way. So we're working hard on our challenge processes as well. And we'd be happy to share more information on that. But those are the highlights. So I'm glad to be back, and I'll turn it back over to Emily.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Angie. I'll take over from here.
Oh, thanks, Annette.
No worries. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. The Office of Digital Equity and Literacy continues to address the issues of affordability, digital skills, and access to devices. We recognize that so many North Carolinians are affected by these gaps, the homework gap, the remote work gap, and the telemedicine gap due to these issues. We know, as according to this slide and the research that we understand from the American Community Survey, that more than 430,000 households are without a home laptop or a desktop laptop that we believe is very critical to being productive and being able to work remote as well as learn remotely. We do not want our citizens having to function solely on a mobile device. We also know that regarding affordability, 1.3 million households in North Carolina would have to pay more than 2% of their annual household to afford broadband at this cost of $60 a month. And according to a recent report by the National Skills Coalition, 1/3 of U.S. workers do not have the foundational digital skills needed to work. Yet in North Carolina, 91% of North Carolina jobs require some digital skills. So we want to close the gaps that impact that. We're on a mission to do that through educating and informing our citizens. Next slide. We are continuing to inform and educate people about the Affordable Connectivity Program. It's a subsidy that provides up to $30 a month discount on internet services. If you're on tribal lands, it provides up to $75 a month discount for those households. And it also allows for a $100 discount on a laptop computer or a tablet that is purchased through a participating provider. Our goal in North Carolina is to have 1 million households enrolled by the end of this year. We understand that there are about 1.7 million households in North Carolina that are actually eligible for this benefit. As of June 8th, we have about 767,000 households enrolled. We're doing okay, but we need to do better. We have a lot more work to do, and that's where we need your help in getting the word out. We have a toolkit with social media notes to help people understand how to help us get the word out. So we encourage all of you to continue helping us. And we thank the folks who have been assisting us so far with getting the word out about ACP and all the different type of work that you do as you are working together with folks who are eligible for this benefit. We've also encouraged internet service providers to offer a $30 a month plan so that eligible recipients would be able to get the benefit for free. So that is a program that we continue to promote and push out of our office. There's a week of action coming up. So if anyone on the call is interested in partnering with us to do a major campaign or promotion this month of June. The week of action is June 14th through the 22nd. So we would love to somehow work with you all to help us get the word out and participate in enrollment activities for ACP. Next slide. So during our Closing the Divide Summit, which some of you may have been there, we heard from Dr. Roberto Gallardo, who is the director of the Purdue Center for Regional Development. He's a national expert on that intersection between digital equity and economic development. And he actually has a history with our office. He actually authored our broadband access and adoption indices, which you can actually find more information about on our website. So we're working together with him. He's developing a statewide data baseline using ACS data, and those profiles will be available on our website. We learned a lot from him about the status of digital equity in North Carolina. And so some of the next slides, we're going to provide a glimpse of where the gaps still exist. So in this slide, we're really talking about what high digital distress means. And this slide is really referring to a situation where homes rely on mobile devices only, something I mentioned earlier that we do not feel is the best way to function, but they may have no devices in the home. And also if they have no internet access and only cellular data. And so this is something that we're hoping will be resolved as we continue to get the infrastructure out. The darker blue areas on this slide, you'll see various regions identified here and where it provides low, moderate, and high concentration of these areas. But the darker areas are the ones with a higher distress as we define here, like Lumber River area and Upper Coastal Plain. So high digital distress. Another area that we want to bring attention to is the homework gap on the next slide. This is an area that we're working really hard to close the gap on with various state agencies and some of the investments that we're making in closing that gap. This shows the percent of children with a computer, but with no internet access. School-age children, many of them fell behind during the pandemic, was already an issue, and so it continues to be so. If they have no access to high-speed internet but have a computer, it's not really as useful to be able to access the online resources at home. We have a goal of connecting 100% of North Carolina households by 2025 so that they will have access to that broadband and be able to function with the computer that they have. Again, unfortunately, the darker areas are showing pretty much the same areas where high distress is, Lumber River area, Upper Coastal Plain. And so we are, again, making sure that we know where the need is great. That's why it's so important to have citizens participate in our survey so we'll know where to address divide sooner rather than later. And I think our last slide, we finally want to bring attention to the senior gap. And this is where our folks in our citizens age 65 or older have no computer. They are without a computer, but so that means they cannot access telehealth, but they may have access to the internet. They have access to some service, but they are unable to access government services. They cannot connect with their loved ones or have other type of social interaction, civic engagement. But most importantly, we want to make sure that these individuals get access to a computer. We're working with our North Carolina Department of Health and Human Service, our Department of Aging and Adult Services to collect feedback directly from this population so that we can understand where the need is and be able to address these digital devices issues. Again, here, darker blue areas show the ones with less access to devices. And so that is an update kind of on how we're focusing our investments and our stakeholder engagement on digital equity and improving it among our younger folks and the seniors. And so at this time, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Maggie Woods on my team to share a little more about what we're doing in digital equity planning. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Annette. I'm really excited to be here this morning. And I recognize a lot of faces in the chat or names in the chat, but I'm seeing a lot of new names as well. So really happy that you're here today. If you came in a little late, I just wanted to remind you that we will be taking questions at the end. But if you have questions as we go throughout, please type them in the chat and we'll make note of them and make sure that we can go back to them. So my role today is really to orient you to the BEAD, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, and the digital equity planning efforts, since that's what today's webinar really is all about, is to update you on where we are with the plans. So just a reminder, we've received funding from the U.S. Department of Commerce to develop these plans over the next year, and we'll give you a timeline in just a moment. But the BEAD plan, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Plan, and I promise not to use too many acronyms today, but I am going to say BEAD because it is easier to say than Broadband Equity Access and Deployment. But that plan is essentially a broadband infrastructure plan. How can we ensure that we are serving all underserved and unserved households and businesses in North Carolina? And the digital equity planning process is focusing on all of those other elements of the digital divide. So making sure people can afford the internet, making sure that they have access to devices, and ensuring that they have the digital skills and digital literacy in order to use the internet and to use the devices. So moving on to the next slide, I wanted to highlight a timeline of where we are in the BEAD and digital equity process. So we did receive the funds from NTIA last fall, and we've been doing community engagement phase. And so many of you may have been on the road with us as we visited all 8 economic prosperity zones across the state to hear from you of what are the challenges, what are the opportunities when it comes to connectivity in North Carolina. And my colleague Emily is going to talk a little bit more about what we've been learning through that process. But this month, we'll actually have a draft BEAD plan up for public comment. So we're really excited to share what we've learned and what we've put together and hear from all of you. And then that initial draft plan will be finalized by the end of July. For digital equity, we have a little bit longer. We expect the digital equity plan to be up for public comment in the beginning of September, with a plan finalized by the end of October. And then in December, there's kind of a second aspect of the BEAD plan that will be submitted, and that's a workforce development plan as it relates to broadband infrastructure. And then in fall, or in 2024, that's when the real work begins. So we'll start with a challenge process to determine eligible locations for the BEAD plan, but that's when we'll really be able to draw down the funds to implement the plans that we've put together, right? Because the goal is not just to do plans for planning's sake. The goal is to make change in North Carolina. So we do expect to receive about somewhere between $1.1 and $1.5 billion for the BEAD plan, and somewhere around $25 million for the digital equity plan. But we should know those allocations by the end of June as well. So again, significant federal funding coming down to implement these plans. And so moving to the next slide, I wanted to talk about what these plans can be, what these funds can be used for, right? Because again, this is to make change in North Carolina. So first and foremost, they can be used for infrastructure for homes and businesses. And that is the goal of the BEAD plan, to serve all unserved and underserved areas in North Carolina, period. But it can also be used to upgrade infrastructure for community anchor institutions, to increase mapping and data collection. And Angie did a great job of sharing some of the mapping updates that we have, but we could always improve that process, right? It can also be used for Wi-Fi infrastructure for multifamily residential buildings, as well as broadband adoption efforts and training and workforce development programs. And then, of course, particularly the digital equity plan is going to be deeply focused on digital equity programs such as digital safety, remote learning and telehealth services, digital literacy and upskilling, cybersecurity education, and other programs as they're outlined as needs in the digital equity plan. These funds can also be used for education for individuals who are incarcerated. Incarcerated individuals are one of the key covered populations or priority populations that we're focused on, and I'll talk through those populations in a moment. These funds can also be used to support digital navigators or digital navigation programs. And if you're not familiar with that term, think of a healthcare navigator, but someone who is helping you where you're at to meet your specific digital needs. So is that figuring out how to qualify for free or low-cost internet? Is that figuring out how you can receive a computer or tablet? Is that connecting you to local digital skills classes? So it's really someone who's meeting you where you're at to support your own digital needs. And then finally, these funds can be used for direct subsidies for internet subscriptions. And so moving to the next slide, there are very specific elements that are defined by law that we need to follow through our state planning process. And I'm going to just give kind of a broad overview, though I'm happy to go more in detail about any of these if you have questions. So we do need to identify barriers to digital equity for the general population, but also those very specific covered populations. And not only are we identifying the barriers, but we're figuring out and creating measurable objectives for overcoming those barriers. So how are we specifically meeting the needs of the most marginalized populations in North Carolina? We're also putting together an asset inventory, and we're partnering with NC Central University to do this, to pull together all of the digital resources that exist in North Carolina. And what I mean by this is really tangible programs that exist in communities across North Carolina. We've done kind of an initial scan based on existing digital inclusion plans, and we already have a list of over 1,000 assets. And these include, libraries that have device lending programs. They include nonprofits and churches that have, computer labs in their basements. It includes community colleges that are providing digital training classes for students in the community. And so the assets are really broad, but meeting very specific needs in communities. And so we're going to be continuing to collect those assets and have a really comprehensive list for the public to use, individuals and organizations to use to connect to those resources. We're also, as I mentioned, connecting and coordinating with digital inclusion planning teams across the state. We do currently have over 40 counties that have a digital inclusion plan, and we know that time, energy, effort, resources have gone into those planning processes, and so we are pulling themes from all of those plans so that we can better understand some of the needs in communities and also some of the solutions that have bubbled out of those plans. And then, of course, we're working across state government. We need to make sure that our strategies align with the strategies of our state agency partners, because we are ultimately a small team, and we need everyone to be working together to meet these goals. We're also going to be focused on workforce planning, particularly when it comes to BEAD. So if we have this significant investment in broadband infrastructure, we need to make sure that we have the workforce to maintain that infrastructure. And then, of course, we have to have up-to-date maps. And so Angie shared some really good maps, but we'll be continuing to update those and improve those throughout the planning process. So moving to the next slide. This is a list of the covered populations. So these are essentially priority populations that have been identified federally as those who are the most digitally excluded. So while the plans are for everyone, there will be a prioritization of best understanding the needs of these populations and addressing those needs, and also addressing any gaps in current programs that may not be meeting the needs of these populations. And moving to the next slide, I did want to note one of the ways we're looking to better understand the needs of these populations is with the state's first digital equity survey. So Angie mentioned our broadband survey, which has been around for a couple years now, though it has gone through an update process recently. This is a survey that's getting at all of the other elements of the digital divide. So it's asking about people's affordability of internet. It's asking whether people have appropriate devices and computers in their household. It's asking what happens if your computer breaks. Where do you go to get help and support, and how affordable was that? So this survey takes about 10 minutes to fill out. It's available online, but we also have paper copies that you can request. You can either print them out or you can request, and we will send you the paper copies as well as pre-addressed envelopes. The survey's available in the top 8 languages and dialects in North Carolina, and we worked really closely with the Governor's Office on Public Engagement and Inclusion to ensure that we were utilizing appropriate languages. We also have a survey, or we have a toolkit that is available online. The toolkit's available in English and in Spanish. And so we do need help getting the word out about this. We're partnering with community-based organizations, with the state library, with cooperative extension to ensure that folks across the state are able to take this. But we are asking for your help to take this yourself, but to share this with your both personal and professional networks. And this will be available through the end of August. So we're doing a really big push this summer. And I saw someone raise their hand. We will be taking questions at the end, but if you have a question that you want to type in the chat right now, please do so, and we will make sure that we respond to it. So moving to the next slide, I think I'm now passing this off to Emily to share how we've been collecting input and to share some of the themes that we've heard. So Emily.
Thank you, Maggie. So we wanted to share a few more ways that you can continue to stay connected with us and provide input in this planning. We are hosting these webinars quarterly to share updates and take your and try to answer your questions and also give you a chance to give us input and feedback. The next one is tentatively planned for August. We will have turned in our BEAD plan and be able to tell you more about, update you and give you a summary of what was in there. And we're also planning to update you on our efforts to develop a broadband workforce plan for the state of North Carolina to make sure we have the workforce that we need to install all of this infrastructure and maintain it and make sure folks can get the access that they need. We'll also be conducting listening sessions with partner organizations to make sure we reach individuals in our state who are part of those covered populations that Maggie mentioned. If your organization is interested in being part of that, please reach out to Maggie and let her know. Angie and Maggie have already mentioned the surveys, and we've put links to those in the chat, but all of this is also on our website. But please do help us spread the word about those 2 surveys, the broadband survey where folks can tell us what kind of internet service they have at their home or business, and then we can use that data to submit challenges on their behalf as needed to the FCC mapping, and then the digital equity survey that will help us with data to make sure we design digital equity strategies to meet the needs of residents in our state. We've been doing a good bit of interagency coordination this spring. We've been having meetings with other state agencies whose work aligns and is impacted by our broadband and digital equity planning work. And I saw some folks from those different agencies joined us this morning, so thank you. It's good to see you again. But if you have thoughts about any particular agencies that you want to make sure we've connected with, please do share that feedback with us. Or if you're from an agency that we haven't communicated with yet, please reach out to us. We'd be glad to talk with you. We have concluded our regional listening sessions around the state, and we hosted a virtual session on Monday of this week for folks who couldn't join us in person for various reasons. So we're going through and trying to analyze all the feedback that we received. And then we had an event on May 23rd that we co-hosted with NTIA and the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners and the North Carolina League of Municipalities. We did hear from NTIA this morning, actually, that they're planning to share the recordings from that event online. They should be available early next week. So if you weren't able to join us in person or online for that event on May 23rd, you'll be able to see the recordings of the presentations that were made and the panels who spoke. So as Annette mentioned, Roberto Gallardo shared some of his initial findings from his research about digital equity indicators in our state. There was a presentation about our mapping efforts that went into more detail than what Angie was able to share this morning. And there was a panel of local leaders about local perspectives on the challenges and possible solutions in their communities, and then a panel of internet service providers talking about the about partnerships and the importance of partnerships in closing the digital divide and in making sure we have the workforce that we need to implement all this planning. And you can always check for updates on our website. We put a link to the BEAD digital equity planning page. So as we have more events or more resources become available, that's where you'll be able to find them. Next slide, please, Crystal. We just wanted to share with you a map that showed where we hosted the regional sessions around the state. We would have liked to go even more places, but we thought the best way to cover our bases was to use the regions that are defined by the North Carolina General Assembly and make sure we hosted one in each of those 8 regions. We're grateful to the folks who hosted us, like Elizabeth City State University, the Piedmont Triad Regional Council in Kernersville, the City of Morganton in the Northwest, the Eastern Band of Cherokee in the Western region, Wingate University in the Southwest, and Fayetteville Tech Community College in the Sandhills region, and the City of Jacksonville in the Southeast region. So we're grateful to all our partner organizations who helped us to host those events and get the word out to folks. Next slide, please, Crystal. So as I said, we've got more than 100 pages of data from the regional sessions and the online sessions that we've done, and we're combing through that and analyzing it and pulling out themes. But we did have a mix of methods at these sessions. We used some polling software to ask folks to respond to some surveys, as well as we collected a lot of qualitative feedback, which folks know takes longer to analyze than the quantitative kind. So we wanted to share the results of this particular survey, where we asked folks at the outset of the listening session to tell us what the 3 biggest community broadband issues were in their community from their lived experience and from their work in their community. And not surprisingly, in the aggregate, the top 3 were what we would have expected from other listening and collaboration that we've done around the state. Number 1 was infrastructure for homes and businesses, but a really close second was the cost of the internet service that is available. We heard a lot about affordability and the importance of addressing affordability for residents in our state. And then 3rd was digital literacy and upskilling. So that validates the importance of the work that Annette and Maggie and the rest of their team are doing to overcome the barriers to digital equity, aside from the actual infrastructure access to broadband. Next, I will point out there were some regional differences in the survey data, and we're still digging into those and figuring out if it's statistically significant. But it was interesting to see differences between regions of our state, and to us that really signified the importance of talking to people in particular regions and not just looking at statewide aggregated data. To best serve our state, it's important that we are thinking at the regional and community level to make sure we're really meeting the needs of residents in our state. Some common assets. So we asked folks to help us with our asset inventory. We're going to create an online resource that anyone can use to identify resources in their community to help them to overcome the digital divide. And so we're collecting these assets for that purpose, but also because this helps us to identify gaps that exist and think about what we can do in our planning and what strategies we can use to help overcome those gaps. So some common assets that we heard all over the state were libraries. And I know we've got some folks from the libraries on this morning. You're very popular people all over the state, and we admire you too. Folks talked about hospitals and resources that the medical community is sharing to help folks access telehealth. We heard a lot about community anchor institutions like community centers, senior centers, churches. Folks commended a lot of local and national businesses that had presence in their region. Folks talked about places where they could access Wi-Fi. There were a lot of folks commended their local community college and universities that were located in the region and the resources that they provide. We heard a lot about nonprofits and social service providers. Some of the ones that were named explicitly a lot were 4-H change makers and Goodwill Industries. Heard a lot about some other state agencies with whom we're partnering, like NC Works in the Department of Commerce and North Carolina Cooperative Extension that operates out of NC State University. A lot of the digital skills training that's offered for adults seems to use the North Star digital literacy platform. And then we also heard a lot about the aging services available through our regional councils of government around the state. We heard a lot about devices, and that both Cramden Institute and E2D, eliminating the digital divide, came up a lot. A lot of folks recognize them as valuable resources to get access to refurbished devices. We did hear a need in the West for more devices, so that's something we're going to keep pursuing. And Annette and Maggie and their team recently convened a working group to work on a device strategy for our state that'll be part of both of these plans going forward. Next slide, please, Crystal. In terms of concerns and challenges, some of these reflect the quantitative numbers that I shared earlier with that bar graph. We heard, and these are in no particular order, they're just things that we heard all over the state. So, of course, one was affordability and access to the internet. Access to devices came up a lot. Folks who feel like they live in a region or a community where they'll need last mile infrastructure. There were folks that were concerned about there being disparities between what internet service providers report in their community versus what's their actual lived experience. And that, I think that gets back to the mapping work that we're doing and trying to provide challenges to the FCC on behalf of residents and businesses in our state to make sure we get the best data possible to make sure that everyone who is unserved or underserved will be eligible for funding that's available to get them better service. We heard a lot about the barriers that especially keep lower income people from being able to access the internet, like poverty and not having access to transportation to get to where there are places with free Wi-Fi. We heard about the need to educate folks about phishing scams and cybersecurity to make sure they'll be participating online in a safe way. We heard a lot about tech support and that in a lot of parts of our state, people don't know where they can go to get help, or especially affordable help if they have problems with a device not working and need repairs. We also heard a lot about trust and that one of the barriers to adoption and to overcoming the digital divide is that there's a lack of trust among residents in different parts of our state about getting on the internet and about sharing data and about accepting assistance from different programs. So that's something we want to dig into more. And then we also heard some concerns about matching funds required for different grants. And so that's something we'll be thinking about as we design new programs and as we refine existing programs and making sure we're not creating unintended barriers with matching funds requirements that may be within our control. And language barriers came up a lot as well. And so that's something we're trying to be really intentional about in addition. Next slide, please, Crystal. We then asked folks to give us feedback about how they would advise us to invest this funding that we're receiving from the federal government and how to deploy those resources. So we heard a lot about providing subsidies to individuals and to households so that they can afford the internet service that's provided to them. We heard about subsidies to providers to incentivize them to expand service to places where they haven't because it doesn't make sense for their business model for whatever reasons. We heard a lot about not prioritizing fiber too much. We heard from fixed wireless folks about the need to include other technologies, and that's something that we'll do in our BEAD plan. We will include other technologies in addition to fiber, recognizing that fiber will not be a viable option for all parts of our state that need access. And as I mentioned, we heard in some places the need for more entities that will refurbish and distribute use devices and get them out to people. We heard a lot about the need for digital navigators, or in places where they have digital navigators, how there's a need to expand those services and have more folks doing that important work. So I think that'll be an important part of our planning. And then we heard about the need for resource guides and coordination that would enable those digital navigators to be even more effective. And finally, we heard about in some parts of our state that they're what people refer to as Zoom rooms, and they called them different things, but that's what we put on this slide. But basically rooms with more that offer more privacy at community anchor institutions like libraries and community centers, where people can do job interviews or have telehealth appointments and feel comfortable that they have a little privacy to do that instead of being in an open space where they're accessing the Wi-Fi or using public devices. Next slide, please, Crystal. So to give you a little preview of what's next, as Maggie mentioned, we're continuing with our asset inventories and needs assessments. Folks can respond to our digital equity survey through August, and we'll be conducting those listening sessions with covered populations through July of this summer. We do expect to get notice of our funding allocation from NTIA at the end of this month. As Angie was mentioning, new data was released from the FCC last week that's referred to as version 2 of the mapping. And we were pleased to learn that as the result of our mapping efforts and the challenges that we submitted on behalf of residents and businesses in North Carolina, and the work of our partners, like so many of you on the call today, about educating folks about their ability to submit challenges on their own behalf online, North Carolina gained 115,000 more unserved locations in the new version 2 of the mapping than we had previously, and that was the largest increase of any state in the nation. So we're pleased that we've improved the accuracy of the maps that much from just one iteration to the next, and our mapping, if our challenges will continue, and we'll keep trying to make the data as accurate as we can, knowing that it's always changing and we're going to have to stay after it. And we're grateful to the internet service providers and the local governments that provide data that help us to issue those challenges on behalf of the people in the state. We should mention that all the mapping tools that we mentioned earlier on that broadband, that one map site, will be updated with the updated data from the FCC. Folks in our CGIA and mapping team are working on that now, and we'll continue to update those resources with the newest version of the FCC data in the next few weeks. We'll post our draft BEAD plan later this month for public comment, and we'll let you all know when that's posted, and we'll welcome your feedback before we refine it and submit the final version to NTIA at the end of July. And then we'll hope to see you again for our next webinar in August. And at that time, we'll also provide updates for you about the digital equity planning effort and when you can expect to see a draft of that for public comment and give more input about that one as well. Next slide, please. All right, finally, we get to your questions. I know that was a lot. We had a lot to share, and we appreciate you sticking with us. We want to make sure everybody has all the best information we have available to share with you. So Crystal, you want to pose questions that have come in through the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them?
Absolutely. This first one I'm going to pose and also answer. So the slide deck, will it be sent after the meeting today? We will be posting that on our website. So don't worry, along with the recording of this session. So you'll be able to have all of that at your fingertips. The site that you would need to go to find those is actually shown on the screen right now, ncbroadband.gov/BEAD. Lori Special asked if anyone is on the call with employment security. She wants to connect with someone about DES and or NC Works about partnerships with public libraries, please. So someone reach out to Lori. And then scrolling down, we had a lot of good questions. Okay, Shalandra with NC Counts posted a question. The current threshold is 25.3 megabits per second with actual implementation. How does the plan lay a framework how to overachieve so that infrastructures and communities do not play catch up? I'm going to post that one to Angie, and if you can answer that.
Sure. So I mean, we're still developing the programs, right, that would actually be used for the infrastructure deployments. Right now, there's some state legislation that considers grade, cab, and stopgap programs as being the infrastructure vehicles. And in general, you know, unlike in the past, there is all this federal funding available. So I think there is for example, our American Rescue Plan Act funds, there's a prioritization for fiber. We have not yet decided all of the policy issues around how the BEAD programs will work, but there's definitely, I think the state and the broadband providers and the NTIA want future-proof technologies. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Next
Angie, you may want
question.
to mention too that all of the projects that we're funding requires speeds of 100 down and 20 up, with the ability to upgrade to being symmetrical.
Yeah, there are speed requirements for our ARP funds and the BEAD program.
Wonderful. Thank you for that clarification. It's great news for the people of North Carolina. The next question came in about the listening sessions. Wanted to know if they were available in different languages other than English. Maggie, I'm going to point that question to you and also ask if you can address what other materials we have in other languages.
Yeah, so the answer is yes, there will be listening sessions for covered populations in languages other than English. We're partnering with organizations on the ground so they can tell us what is needed for the population that we're serving. So by the next quarterly update, we should have those completed, and we'll have an update of how many were done in, for non-native English speakers, but it is a key priority of ours. And as I mentioned, we do have the Digital Equity Survey available in the top 8 languages and dialects in North Carolina. And so that's been a key priority. And then our toolkit for the Digital Equity Survey is also available in English and in Spanish. So if there are any specific language needs that you would like to see, please let us know. We're really trying to build out our materials in other languages. And I will note that the Digital Equity Plan, when it's finalized, will be available in English and Spanish, and we're working to make it available in those same languages that we have it in the Digital Equity Survey.
Wonderful. And also just wanted to note that the NC Broadband Survey that has the additional speed test is also available in English and Spanish. So we've got that as well. See what else we've got. Lori Special asked a question. She said the 100 megabits per second minimum is for the baseline service, even the Affordable Connectivity Program. Yes?
I think since the BEAD programs are still under development, so I think that we will just, for our ARPA programs right now, the minimum is 100 down, 20 up, or 100 symmetrical. And the ACP, I'm not sure, Emily, do you know what the minimum speed required is for ACP?
Yeah, I was going to clarify that those requirements are for the infrastructure projects that we're investing in on behalf of the state. But those requirements don't extend to all providers who participate in the Affordable Connectivity Program. So folks who enroll in the Affordable Connectivity Program may be using that subsidy for a service that does not meet those speed thresholds.
Thank you for that. We have another question. What has been the response from local community leaders such as mayors and town managers in regard to BEAD being available and helping their constituents close the digital divide?
Yeah, I think local leaders are excited about and anticipating this additional federal funding that's going to be invested in our state, and there's widespread acknowledgement that this is a really historic point in our state's history, that so much funding is available to address the digital divide in our state. Folks like Angie have been doing this important work for many years when this kind of funding was not available. And so there's widespread acknowledgement that this is a really important time in our state's history, and that we've got a great opportunity here to get service to all the residents and businesses in our state and help them thrive and prosper.
Fantastic. We have another clarification question about the difference between a couple programs. And Angie, I'm going to point this one to you to start. So what's the difference between CAB, or the Completing Access to Broadband program, which is an American Rescue Plan Act funded program, and BEAD? and the timeline comparison between the two programs.
Yeah, so right now, the division is still working with ARPA funds, so American Rescue Plan Act funds. And within that federal funding, we have a great grant program, a completing access to broadband program, stopgap program, pole replacement. So 4 main infrastructure programs themselves. ARPA is the funding source. And so similarly with this new money from the NTIA, U.S. Department of Commerce, BEAD is the overall NTIA program. And then within that, we will have infrastructure pots that are being developed to roll out the BEAD money. So right now we're finishing ARPA, so that will really run into next year. The BEAD programs, those infrastructure pots will not be deployed till sometime probably late next year. So doing the planning work now.
Fantastic. That's all the questions we've received so far. If anyone has an additional question, please, raise your hand or put it in the chat and we're happy to answer it. We'll stay on for a few minutes. To everyone who said thanks, we are absolutely thankful for you to attending, for everyone that you have brought here to provide feedback and support for these programs along the way and our planning process. We have yet another question. Are there any updates on the pole replacement program? And will Duke have access to those funds?
Yes, we are working on the guidance as we have been, but we have it mostly drafted and expect to release that in the next few weeks. What we're working on now is the eligible areas piece of that guidance. Duke would not be eligible, so the pole replacement program is really to fund the telecommunications providers that attach on poles, and the pole owners that are eligible are the municipalities or our co-ops. So that's based on the legislation.
Fantastic. Okay, we've got 1 minute to go. We will hold and see if we have any other questions. If not, again, here we go. You're absolutely welcome, Lori, and we are happy to answer any and all questions. Maggie is fantastic. We adore her, as is Emily and Angie. We appreciate all the specific information they can provide about the programs and their background in the digital equity and broadband space. Okay, hearing no other questions, we are going to adjourn. If you do have any questions, please feel free. Emily is putting her contact information. I'm going to show these resources very quickly. These again will be available on the website, and then I'm going to land here where you can see all of their contact information. And we appreciate everyone for attending today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.